there he is.
Hey, sorry.
No worries. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm well.
Excellent. So we are streaming live, not only in Zoom, but also on Facebook as well.
Very
So I have a few slides just to kind of make it, just keep my thoughts organized. But then once the slides are done, then I'll toggle between here and Facebook and make sure we get those questions answered as well. But we have people calling from all over the country, people from California, Tennessee,
very
Michigan. So lots of people just wanted to ask us anything. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, I'm so glad we're doing this. Thank you for organizing
Of
this.
course, of
I'm
course.
impressed by your ability to put this together. You'll have to teach me your ways
Oh,
here soon.
I had a couple interns this summer, so I'm stealing some of their excellent template work and what they did. But I'm happy to share, and I'll be posting this as well, so this will be made available for anyone and everyone after the fact. So
Yeah, where are you zooming in from?
I'm zooming in from a tiny little conference room in my co-working space in Pittsburgh. I'd like to come in. There's some soundproofing, so it's nice to have a little more formal setting for things like this, but usually I'm calling in from my living room. How about you?
Yeah, this is our office slash living room slash tech space slash coaching and counseling center for consciously.
Love
Yeah.
it. Well, let's get into it. I had a couple slides and then it's going to be super formal after this. And please correct anything if I got anything wrong on the slides about you. So
Sure, sure.
I just pulling from where I could find things. But thank you all for on Facebook, on the Zoom call, joining us for the day in the life of two organizational psychologists.
Oh, cool.
And let's go to, okay, so I had this little meme I used from a long time ago and I wanted to pull it up, but no one it's always so confusing. I don't know if you if you have these conversations as well all the time with people in your life, but I was a psychologist, I don't know if anyone's seen Office Space, but the Bobs, I feel like that's what those who've seen the movie think that we do. And my family, I still have to teach them I'm not a counseling psychologist, and society, I don't think, knows what we do. We're not very good at branding ourselves as a field. And then what I think I do is, saving the world. And then what I really do is just try to make sense of data. But I'm curious if this slide resonates with you, if you'd add anything, or if this is...
Yeah, well, it's funny that, now I spend more time coaching. That second, like what my family thinks I do is probably like more accurate than it used to be. And I can get into that a little bit, but I love this. I love this. I'd say my wife is probably the only person in my life who gets it. Everyone else is somewhere on this chart here. So yeah, this is definitely resonates.
And then just so we can get everyone on the same page with definitions and we can get this more technical stuff out of the way, but industrial organizational psychology, not input output, not individual organization, it's industrial organizational psychology. I've dropped the industrial part to my title.
I have too. Yeah, I have too. It's not as appealing or sexy, and I just feel like organizational psychology just speaks more to the work that I'm doing today. People get that too. So I'm like, what is industrial? I'm like, I don't know. It's hard to describe.
We're on the total same page with that. And no industry or field should be 10 syllables in length. So need a little rebranding help there. But organizational psychologists, we are, and we use science and data to make strategic decisions about workplace behavior that impact bottom line results. And this could mean a wide variety of things. And I'm excited to talk about the differences and the different applications of this with you today. And, essentially we drive business performance by enhancing people performance and, really focusing a lot of the topics that I feel like one would learn in an MBA program or, organizational behavior. But we really look at it from the people bottom line, not necessarily the profit bottom line, even though taking care of people is going to lead to the financial output as well. So
yeah, that's the theory and the practice.
And this is just a word cloud. A little bit of research done a few years ago. Society for IO Psychology did some research on how IOs really define the field for ourselves. And the bigger the word, the more common it was used in the data collection and people, organizations, helping people at work. I feel like this is a good quick snapshot of what we're all about as IO psychologists.
Yeah, I love this. People, I'm so glad people came out as the largest. That's a good thing. We're off to a strong start. People, organizations, and work. That's IO psychology, right?
Love it. Love it. And then, let's just get right into why people are here. They want to know what we do. So I'll kick it over to you, Kvon. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Oh man, how much time should I spend? Give me some guardrails. A minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Let's do 5 minutes, and then we'll get into the questions.
Okay. So I'll start with the tagline there at the bottom. All I know is how to help people grow. This is something that came to me, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, and I've just attached myself to it. As it says here, my background is in industrial organizational psychology, or MSIO. And prior to that, actually, I got my bachelor's in psychology as well. So that's part of the reason why I say what I say in terms of all I know is how to help people grow, because my whole career has been centered on people. And I got my first big boy job at Southern California Edison in the learning and development department doing training program analysis. So I was like really using those I side of the skill set there, essentially helping organizations, helping Southern California Edison learn what makes training effective, which as a learning professional was a great starting point for your career. I'm like, oh, this is, I got down to the nitty gritty in terms of like what makes learning and development effective. And that helped me grow into subsequent roles. So I went from training program analyst to training program manager, where I was helping manage the design and development of training programs. And then from there, got some promotions. I ended up managing people who were managing the development of training programs, which was fun to do. And I got to be humbled by all of the learning and development that I didn't get in terms of preparation for becoming a manager, which is something that I'm sure many people can resonate with. And after doing that work, like training program analysis, I went back into learning evaluation. It was like one of those things that I was really good at. So I was good with numbers, right? And this is what IO programs train you to be good at. It's like being good with numbers, learning how to manage data, learning how to analyze data. So I was using those skills a lot, all in the learning and development space. And then I woke up one day and I was kind of miserable, to be quite honest. I woke up and I'm like, this isn't it for me. Something made me realize that the work that I had been doing wasn't really connecting with my purpose. I didn't feel like I was fulfilling my purpose. Though I was in the learning and development space and I was helping people grow, I was so far removed from the process that I decided that I needed to get closer to it. And so, I went on this search of finding work that was actually really meaningful to me and stumbled on facilitation. And so it's like this weird thing as an IO psychologist, you're like, what? I had a perspective on trainers, right? And it's like, I'm here to design organizations and, put names in boxes and all these things. And so no way would I ever think about being a trainer. But it ended up becoming the most connective work for me. I remember very, very kind of clearly where I was facilitating a class on communication skills for frontline supervisors at Southern California Edison. And I just fell in love with that process. Mm-hmm. And to me at that time, it felt like the most IO work I had done, which is odd because it was something that just felt super removed from what I had learned in school. Of course, I did a training and development program or a class or a course, but no one in IO was actually talking about doing this kind of work. So I'm like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? But it felt like helping people grow, and I was in that process, which was actually creating an impact for individuals and also for the leaders and for the teams that they were leading. So I was like, oh, there's something to this. I need to explore this. So I started to do more facilitation while I was there, and this is all off the side of my desk, and spending more time with the manager and leadership development facilitators. And then I learned that they were all coaches. I'm like, what is coaching? So they said,
What is coaching?
yeah,
What is coaching?
what is
How do
coaching?
you define coaching?
I had no idea what coaching was. So they said, go to CTI Fundamentals, call me in the morning. So I did that, and I'm like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And coaching to me also feels like some of the most I/O work that I've done to date, especially working with leaders. So that led me on this journey. I left Southern California Edison, went to Netflix, did some manager and leadership development there, did some assessment development there as well. Then I went to Amazon, did more manager and leadership development facilitation and coaching, which then led me to Google. So now I'm running my own manager and leadership development shop for a Google staffing organization, which is about 3,000 to 4,000 people and 450 managers. That's my target audience. And of course, I have Consciously, which I founded a few years ago, where I'm focused on executive and leadership coaching and doing a little bit of consulting as well. So it's this perfect balance between the stuff that I learned in terms of consulting with organizations, plus the things that I've grown into in terms of manager and leadership development, coaching, and facilitation. So that's me in about 5.5 minutes.
That was perfect.
Yeah.
That was perfect. Now, those on the call have been putting some questions. I've been urging them to put some questions in chat. So I'm going to share a little about my background, but if you have any questions about anything Kvon has done or anything I've done, please put those questions in chat, and we're so happy to answer those for you as we go. So a little bit about my background. I have my PhD in organizational psychology, and I noticed a number of the questions from the Zoom invite had to do with the difference between the PhD and the master's, and if you can call yourself an IO psychologist if you just have a master's. Of course you can. Like that question broke my heart. I'm like, what else would you call yourself? And like the work that you can do with a master's or even like just a bachelor's, like that's still important work if you're using science and data to improve the human experience at work. Like that's IO psychology. And so this idea of this degree prestige or something, credential prestige, like I mean we can dive deeper into that, but that just like rubbed me. I'm like, yes, you're an IO psychologist regardless of what degree or honors you have.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, but I read somewhere that you're not allowed or supposed to call yourself a psychologist unless you have a PhD. So it's like somewhere out there in some literature, but I wholeheartedly disagree.
Yeah, you and I are very aligned in that regard. I know there's certification implications for like clinical and counseling psychology to be able to like take on like clinical clients. So maybe that kind of like bled into our field or something. But oh my gosh, that just rubbed me the wrong way. Yeah, yes, you are as IO psychology as they come. So you don't need a PhD. And so, yeah, that was my background, though I do have my PhD. And the reason I decided to go that route and not to do a master's program is I've always been very drawn to academia. I wanted the option of potentially ending up, a lot of IO psychologists with PhDs end up in business schools. And I love that, like to bring in my psychological perspective and kind of infiltrate like the MBA programs and all these future leaders, like the work that, you're talking about, you work with leaders at Google and in your practice. Like I love the idea of getting the leaders at that student level and getting them to really see the value of psychology and taking care of their people and how that, should really be a pillar of their work. So I wanted to have that option to stay in academia. And I do love the research side of things. I'm in the process of publishing my dissertation right now, which is really exciting. That was a study where we looked at, can you train executive male leaders to be better allies particularly this was for women, to create more gender equity at work. And spoiler alert, you can. Those who went through the training were 86% more likely to speak up and point out instances of gender inequality at their company. And, having leaders in that executive level position to be vocal about these issues that typically, you don't hear them talking much about, and it's the first step of then leading to action in that long-term policy and systemic change, actually leads to more inclusive and diverse organizations. But doing that research, having these academic partners, contributing back to the So the literature that I'm always pulling from in the work I do, that was really important to me. So I endured the extra 4 years, got my PhD done in 6 years. From there, I interned at Amazon on their talent assessment team. I worked at DDI doing a lot of leadership development. That's how I really got interested in not only the women in leadership and gender equity space, but the diversity, equity, inclusion space more broadly, and how we can bring, and this is, you know, my company that I founded about a year ago now, how can we bring organizational psychology and the research and the data to this intersection of diversity, equity, inclusion, learning and development, and people analytics. So really, you know, helping my HR and DE&I partners bring, you know, evidence-based and data-driven strategy to what they're trying to do to create more inclusive and diverse organizations. So just a little brief overview about me, but I want to get to the questions that people have been posing to us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then also monitor the Facebook group as well to see if people are asking questions on there. But the first question is talking about this distinction between the master's and the PhD. I feel like the most questions came up here, and that's why I was really excited to have you on, Kvon, because you have had such an impressive career, and you know you have. And when I talk about, I get this question a lot from prospective students, people interested in IO, and I've always say, unless you want to end up in academia, like the PhD doesn't seem as appealing to me. Is if you knew for certain you wanted to stay in industry. And I was curious your perspective on that, and any more differentiators between the master's and the PhD routes.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to folks, I get a similar question and I respond in a similar way. I tend to think that if you are clear that you enjoy research and you want that to be a part of your career, then yeah, definitely go PhD. If you are clear that you do not enjoy research and you do not want that to be part of your career, and you may want to think about the master's approach. And that's generally how I tend to respond to that question. I also share that the workforce is getting a little more competitive. And you know, the traditional academic institutions are maybe not the center of excellence that they were before. Like you can do well without having a master's or a PhD in different fields. And there's still this value of having a certain number of letters behind your name. And there's no getting around that quite yet, right? And so I'll say, like, working in a place like Google, that value of being extremely well educated, even on the practitioner side, is important for some people, and some folks want to hire PhDs to do certain types of work, especially when we're talking about like doing work around like data analysis, managing big data. Most masters do not get the same level of training when it comes to managing data, like managing big data. So it's something that you can learn post your master's program, sure, or something you can emphasize in your master's program. But PhDs are going to prepare you for that kind of work, I think, much more effectively than a master's program. So if you kind of know the area that you want to go into and the kind of work that you want to do, PhD might be great, even if you do want to be a practitioner. So it just kind of depends on how clear you are in terms of what you want to do.
How did you go about making that decision for yourself?
Yeah, I knew I wasn't crazy about research. I value it. I think it's important, and it's like something I continue to do as a practitioner, right? A scientist practitioner model. It hasn't left me, you know. And I think I was very, very clear early on that I wanted to be a practitioner. And, you know, that was after talking to a number of folks, learning more about what was important to them and how they were using their degrees. I landed on a master's program. So I'm like, yeah, that's the work. Like I had always had in my mind that I was going to do consulting. You know, I was like, that's what I want to do. And what I'm doing today is that, and it's different as well. But I knew that I wanted to work in organizations. And so master's program just made the most sense for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. How about you?
I've always loved teaching. I tried my hand at teaching at the elementary level right after undergrad. I did Teach for America briefly, and that was a very poor fit for me. It's a phenomenal program, but not a good fit for me. And I didn't want to make that same mistake going into a graduate degree. And so I did know I love teaching. It's the classroom management part. So like, as long as the students come to the class, I will entertain and educate and inspire, but I can't be awarding out like discipline. I was like, I have such respect for teachers. And now as a mom with a son starting kindergarten in a virtual world, I have a whole newfound respect for teachers and everything they do for society. But that's another call for another day. But I knew I wanted to still teach at the university level. I knew that I did want to do research. I do like the writing process. I don't like the speed of it, though, or the lack thereof, rather. My one big publication, I started that work when I was pregnant with my son, and it finally got published when he was 4 years old. So I'm like, okay. And then to go to Amazon and have literally 4 months as an internship, but to like build, implement, and evaluate an entire program in 4 months. I'm like, okay, this is more my speed of things.
Yeah, very different.
But I would like to potentially end up in a business school, maybe later on in my career, once I have more of the. Let me just mute that. Perfect. Thank you for muting that. Whoever just did that. But I just wanted to have the options. And I've always loved academia. I do miss it somewhat, but I think entrepreneurship is a better fit for where I'm headed in life. So
it's like, you went through your program, you pick up those components, you pick up these different tools, and they never leave you. Like even I, as a master's, like I'm developing an assessment, and it's like, I can only do that as a coach because of my master's program. And it's like the value of research is so important that it'll never leave you, even as an entrepreneur, as a practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Because we use the research, we use that work every day in our work. And I think that's a huge value that I always bring to organizations. We're not just making up things off the top of our head because it feels, sometimes, but at least what's underneath that is I'm always looking, okay, what works in the literature? What's the evidence behind this? What's the recommendation, whether it's the content or the actual, implementation itself, the scales. I'm all about how do we measure inclusion in a scientifically valid way. I feel like that's really, we get that in our training regardless of what the program is. Speaking of training and certification, we do have a question from Raj for you, Kvon. What does the coactive part of the coaching mean in your certification?
Hey, Raj, thanks for the question. Coactive is essentially, it's a coaching model. And so check it out, coactive.com, no hyphen. Coactive really is about the balance between being and doing, and using both to help coachees, clients learn more about who they are and what's important to them, and also forward the action. So encouraging them to actually go do something about the things that they want or who they want to be. The reason why the coactive model is so powerful and important is so many people, at least in the United States society, focus a lot on the doing, focus a lot on the action, and don't actually spend a lot of time in the being space to encourage people to reflect, like, what is going on right now? What do I want? What is important to me? Where do I want to go? Any number of questions that you could ask yourself about what you want to accomplish. We don't spend a lot of time in that space, and I'll speak personally. I've spent most of my life, this is how I ended up being miserable in my career. I spent most of my life just doing the things that I thought I was supposed to do. And I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about or being with where I wanted to go, what I wanted. And so in the coactive model, we encourage both. And we really try to balance both. And we think that when you do both, people transform. And you can have too much doing, which is, leads people to potentially burn out or end up in places that they didn't really want to be in. Or you can do too much being, which is like, okay, it's lots of navel gazing. Isn't this nice to just be all the time? Well, yes, it is nice. And we live in a society that values productivity. So we've got to get to work as well.
Oh, I love that. And it reminds me of like the behavior change work I do. And, people just want to like jump to, okay, well, what should we be doing? Especially with like diversity and inclusion. What should we be doing? We need to start doing things now and changing everything now. And it's okay, let's stop for a moment. Like, where do you want to be? Like, what do you want that company identity to be? And where are you at on your journey, right? What are your core beliefs? Like, we can't just be doing this just for the optics of it, or because that's what all your competitors are doing. Like, what do you actually believe about the benefits of a diverse and inclusive workforce?
That is so important, and that is a large part of, that's coaching, and like there's a fine line between like really good consulting and good coaching, right? And if you're a good consultant, you're doing a little bit of coaching at the same time. And I'm with you. I think that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talk about really anything. If the leaders in an organization, this is why I landed on leadership development for me as an IO practitioner. If the leaders in an organization aren't aligned, and I mean like personally aligned to what you all are trying to accomplish, or what the broader organization is trying to accomplish, you're not going to be able to create sustainable change. Like, this is what I've learned over the 10 plus years that I have been a practitioner. Leaders have to be personally aligned to the change that they or someone else is trying to create that sustainable change. Sure, you can do stuff, you can create a plan, you can build a solution, and it'll launch, and with moderate or sometimes not so moderate success. But if you really want to create long-lasting, meaningful change, leaders have to be aligned, and that's where good consulting and coaching comes in to the overall like change management process, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. So I personally, I've had coaches, I've been coached, I've like coached, mentees and like, in labs and different things I worked with, but I've never like delved down the coaching route. The comparison between coaching and consulting, I think, is really interesting, because now I'm actually coaching clients very specific. It's not the type of, I think, deep transformational change that you're able to do, Kvon, with like your training and in your background. My coaching is really specific to, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that strategy, and helping these leaders, start. So it's very, targeted and focused around that. But we do get at, the broader values, the beliefs, the mindset shifts. And I'm like, wow, like maybe the IO psychology and coaching is actually a lot more intertwined than I had ever realized before.
They are. This is what I've learned over the course of my career. And this is why I say I feel like coaching is some of the most IO work that I've done, because your organizations don't change. Organizations don't transform unless leaders transform.
Yeah.
Right? You want to create organizational transformation, you don't have to. It behooves you as an IO to encourage the transformation of the leaders who are supposed to support that change. Right? And being a coach gives you the tools to work with the leaders in that way. Right? I think it's quite powerful. So if you're thinking about coaching, I'm like, go for it. Let's talk about it. And then for me, to any IO who's on here, like if you're curious about coaching, talk to me, or just like sign up and learn more about it. Because I think it's a really powerful combination. Like, me as a coach and a consultant, I approach my consulting very differently. And I actually bake coaching into my consulting solutions, because supporting leaders through the change I see is the number one priority.
Yeah.
The solution is second. The leaders' transformation is first, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I wanted to pivot just a little bit to make sure we're covering all the questions, but you did say use the word transformation, and I'm sure you know see that and help facilitate that all the time with at that leader level. But we're also going through a major transformation of the workplace right now, post-COVID, remote work, the digitization that's been happening for quite some time now, but I feel like it's just been companies that didn't have their digital plan in order had to learn really quickly over these last few months as so many companies went work from home. And I'm curious, like, what do you see as some shifts in, for those who are thinking about IO psychology as a potential career track, whether they're current students looking for a career change, how has the field of IO psychology changed or going to change or need to change because of this new, you know, post-COVID world that we're living in?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a really big question because there's so many different aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my wife and I we talk about change all the time. So for those that don't know, my wife is a psychotherapist, and we co-run Consciously Together. She does the counseling end, I do the consulting, coaching end, but together we're focused on transformation of individuals, helping them live their lives on purpose. And we talk about change all the time because we're both in the business of personal and professional change. And when we look at what's going on right now, we can't escape the idea that remote work is the future, right? And we are going to be in this for probably far longer than maybe most people want to be in it, to be quite honest. I don't, you know, like I work at Google during the day, and Google's like, hey, we're not going to come back to the office until like July next year. And I'm like, are we though? You know, are we sure about that? I mean, that's at the earliest, right? And so when I think about the industry as a whole, and this is like the work industry, if I were starting off right now, I would be investing in exploring how to make remote work highly effective, how to facilitate connection between employees, between managers and direct reports, between leaders across organizations, how to facilitate when you aren't in the room with a person, when you just don't have that anymore. I think this is the future. I think this is the life that we're going to be living for a long time, and maybe we'll be going back to the office from time to time, but I have a hard time imagining us spending most of our hours in an office in the future. And so there's all kinds of implications that come from that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I remember reading this article years ago in Time Magazine. You know, it was asking like, what's something that's so commonplace now that like our grandkids are gonna laugh about? Be like, you did that. And the answer was the fact that we had to like go into work every day and like have a commute, and we all have like physically be in the same space. Like, what? Like, like that makes no sense. You can just work from wherever. And I remember like, oh, I can't wait for that day in this like far future. And then the global pandemic happened, and now that day is here. And one thing I thought of when I saw these questions come in was, you know, IO psychology, I feel like was already a role or position that was pretty easy to do remotely because of the type of work we do, especially more of like the, you know, you and I, maybe I didn't get as much diversity on this call as I was hoping, because you and I come with very similar preferences and backgrounds in regard to being like the learning and development, and you know, kind of like our even though we ended up doing different things, like I feel like we still have the strong O side of things, and not as much as even the training is in the I, you know, like I feel like a lot of our peers are in that like heavy assessment space or the selection space, and it's a lot of data, it's a lot of just behind the screen, and not as much, you know, that facilitation work that you and I love so much. Like, and I feel like with more of those data heavy roles, like you could do that. They've already been done from anywhere, and so it really doesn't impact those roles as much. I think it's more of the coaching, the facilitation. And I think about, you know, I'm planning a session now for one of my clients, and it's for their executives on getting them to care about DE&I and why they need to be allies and why that matters. And I'm like, okay, I know we can do this virtually, but like, I have to figure out how to do this virtually.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? It's a whole new world that we're in. It's not easy, but it can be done.
Yeah,
Right?
it's
Like,
totally
and
possible.
as people say, oh, this working from home is as effective. I think we're in the a certain stage of the change curve, essentially, where we're probably not seeing the true effects quite yet, like all the positive outcomes of working from home, because there's so much going on in the world. But I think once we begin to come up on that upswing, we'll see like, oh, this is a better way to work. I mean, it provides so much more flexibility for people, allows people to create the lives that they want, allows people to really work where they want to work. And then we'll have improved technology in the future that will just make this kind of connection a bit more seamless. And so it's all, I mean, it's being developed, it's being deployed now, and it'll only improve in the future. So sooner or later, this is going to be the better way. I believe that. We're starting to see that today.
I think so. I mean, I've seen some research come out saying people are, I think they need to parse it out from like those who don't have as many responsibilities at home too, because I think working parents we're sent for a major loop in this current state of affairs. But for those who've been able to have the childcare taken care of or not have like those additional caregiver responsibilities, are more productive because you're not having the commute time and you're not having all the distractions. But what I think is getting lost is that the energy, the off the cuff, like just being able to turn around and like, hey, what do you think about this idea? Or just like the brainstorming, like the innovation. And like, I'm really curious to see like what tools and what solutions come out there to like get back some of that teamwork that is a little harder to capture and replicate virtually.
Yeah, and that's a big part of Google culture, right? So Google's designed around creating those chance interactions, and that's part of the reason why organizations like Google, they're not the only ones, are not going to say we're never coming back, right? Because it's so important to the culture. And these ideas are being tested, right? They're being tested now. We thought that this was really important. How important is it really?
Yeah.
Right? And we're learning that maybe we have some biases about like the outcomes of those chance interactions and whether they were really necessary, or whether more time by myself and more time to reflect can create similar types of creativity. And then you can share those with your teammates. You can share those with your manager, like, oh, I have more time to myself to just be.
Yeah.
And that's like bringing back the coactive idea. I have more time to be. What happens when I reflect a little bit more versus just bouncing off my teammates? So it's going to be different. The effectiveness, I think, is arguable.
Yeah. You touched upon this, and someone asked a question in the comments. How do you find Google's culture as an IO psychologist? And you mentioned a little bit with the team stuff, but
another big question. Oh, I have a lot of opinions and thoughts and reflections on Google culture. And this is where, personally, I feel very fortunate to have had an IO training, and also like my bachelor's in psychology is understanding human behavior and understanding personality. And so I tend to look at, now you might do something similar, but I tend to look at organizations as a reflection of the most senior leaders. And like organizations tend to have like a personality, right? And there's research done, and even within Google, there's research around like, what's the personality of Googlers? I'd say the culture at Google is one, like highly collaborative, like super collaborative. It's, they're known for it. It's very important to the organization. And so that has all kind of implications about like workflow, work streams. It's like you're kind of expected to poke and prod on people's work. You're kind of expected to share. If you don't, you get slapped on the hand. Like, hey, you should have like ran this by a couple more people, because that's the googly way to do things. There's also a culture of, I want to say, very high expectations, But the psychologist in me says that there's pretty rampant perfectionism in the organization. And that can be great in terms of expectations, like people hold themselves to very high expectations, and that creates excellent high quality work. And it also has an underside. If you know about perfectionism, you know the root is in shame, and that has some maybe not so positive outcomes for the people who work there. It's like how folks interact with each other, how they reflect on themselves. Like these things can be challenging when you're also talking about collaborating. It's like, you didn't do this the way that I would have done it, therefore that's not the right way to do it. So that's one thing that is just surprising to me that I think is really important to know about, like working at Google. Not a problem. I struggle with perfectionism, as do many other high performers. Like you can work through it, but having that awareness, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I could go on and on, but those are some of the things that jump out to me about Google's culture. So it's like high collaboration, a little bit of perfectionism, yeah, and quite a few other things.
Yeah. I'm sure it's a fascinating. But there's a good number of IO psychologists at Google.
There are, yes. That's a large part of the reason why I went to work for Google. I read Laszlo Bock's Work Rules. And if you haven't read that, check it out. Pretty good book. And in that book, I remember the paragraph. I don't remember the words exactly. But he essentially tells any leader who is reading this book, any leader of an organization, he says, hire IOs and listen to them. And I was like, I need to work at this place. Because I had been a part of too many organizations at that point who had no idea what IOs were or how to use them, or like didn't really understand the value of them. And here we are having the head of HR essentially saying, hire IOs and listen to them. I'm like, yeah, that's the place I need to be. So there's a pretty strong community of IOs at Google, which is just awesome because you get to see the work that we're doing. And it's like you have other people who see things the way that you see them and speak your language just like you and I. You're like, oh, like we get it, and that's really, really valuable, especially if you're like a younger IO and you haven't really like learned how to, make your way in an organization. To have other people who understand your value to an organization is really, really helpful.
Yeah, that comment brings me to a question related, asking about like personal alignment and finding that, how we find that alignment with our work and with the companies we work for. And this is also related to why I was entrepreneurship. But I think with anyone working any job, having some sort of seeing yourself in those mission, the values, what the company does, but above and beyond just what your role is, but what are you contributing to that company? What is that company contributing to the world? And having that alignment, I think, is really important. And I think, and then as an IO psychologist, even more so, right? Because like we study people at work. And so to have misalignment as a human in the place of work, I think is like even more of like a cognitive dissonance like crisis.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like the cobbler's children. Like having no shoes. It's kind of like you don't want to be in that situation, where you're not practicing what you're preaching.
Exactly.
And that happens, right? It happens in every profession. Every profession. So
exactly. Yeah. We did have a question about entrepreneurship and just asking to share some of the do's and don'ts of starting your own consulting firm to help businesses with IO areas. And you've been doing Consciously for quite some time now. How has that journey been for you, especially doing, like, I went all in, I think I personally would have had a really hard time trying to juggle both. So I'm so impressed how you pull that off, and just like
I want to hear about you too, because you have inspired me to see you kind of taking off on this little rocket ship of yours. I want to learn more about that from you. I'll share from me. I was working a full-time job when I founded Consciously, and I'm still working a full-time job, and Consciously is growing. And so I'd say personally, as an entrepreneur, do's for me, and this is just me personally, take your time. If you are working full time like I was, and you want to grow an organization, there's no rush. And this is something that I've had to learn time and time again as I've been steadily encouraged to quit my day job and follow the organization that I'm leading full time or more of the time. I've also had to wrestle with the pressure of like appearances. Like, what does it mean to be working full time and running your own organization? And now I've just centered like consciously will grow at the rate that it needs to grow, at the rate that I'm able to allow it to grow. And as I focused my energy more unconsciously, it magically just grows. So there's not a lot of pressure that I feel. So that would be my guidance is start slow. And that has helped me because I've been able to build infrastructure for the organization like you would as a consultant. I've been able to do that for myself at a rate that works well. So I'm not like falling behind with clients because I've already built the structure to be able to manage my new clients really well. So that's worked for me, is to build slow and then pile on clients on top of a strong foundation. Don'ts. I don't know. Like, what would be a don't for me? Almost like the opposite of what I guess I just suggested. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to like go big unless you're Victoria. Let her inspire you to go big, go fast. For me, when working a full-time job, the slower pace was really important for me. And now I feel like I have the security and freedom to launch at any point and do my own thing full time. And I'm a much wiser professional. I have a lot more experience than I did earlier on. So when I think back, I have a hard time imagining like, what would I have done if I had launched my consulting firm on my own 5-10 years ago? And I would have added value, but nowhere near the value that I add today. So that's a quick response from me.
I love it.
How about you, Victoria? I want to hear like your journey.
So I completely burnt out at my last corporate job. I always say I felt like the medical doctor who tells their patients not to smoke, and then I was outside back smoking a pack a day. Like, take that analogy but trade out cigarettes with burnout and all the wrong things to do. And that's why I've spent the last year really learning, from the research, from my personal experience, personal work, of how to be an effective remote employee without burning out, right? Because you don't have those boundaries of being physically someplace, and you can end up working ridiculous hours and not having those clear lines between work and home. And so I feel like it really equipped me to help with a lot of people are dealing with maybe for the first time with being remote employees. But I say that because I didn't have to make that. I feel like that's the hardest first jump for entrepreneurs, is deciding whenever, okay, now it's time to do this all in. And I think a don't is thinking that there's one way of doing this, because you and I both are taking very different approaches, but we both have meaningful, successful, good IO businesses, and you don't have to do it 100%, and it doesn't have to look a certain way. You don't have to have certain, goals met, as long as you are serving clients and doing good work and getting paid for that transaction. That is a successful business. So I think it's one of the don'ts is don't think it has to look a certain way or be a certain way. I think it's and being an entrepreneur is really, it's being a leader, and it's being decisive, and it's knowing what your vision is and what you want to accomplish and just kind of running with it. I do, one of my big do's is to fall in love with the problem we're trying to solve. So unintuitively, my company is called Mattingly Solutions, but at the end of the day, I have so many things that fall under that solution umbrella. The problem is always the same. What's preventing this workplace from letting people from all different backgrounds thrive? What is that problem? What do companies struggle with when it comes to measuring, developing inclusion? What is that problem? And then learning intimately what that problem is, how that problem surfaces itself at different organizations. Really figuring out, who that target audience is, who your key partners are, and understanding what that problem is. Don't fall in love with the solution, because that should always be shifting and changing depending on the context, the company, the market. There could be a global pandemic, there's all these things. And if you fall in love with the solution, you'll miss out on solving the right problem.
I love that. Fall in love with a problem. That is wise advice. And it's funny you say that, because as you saying that makes me reflect, like, oh, that's what I did, but I didn't even have the wisdom to be so pointed in that, right? Like, we found it consciously because the problem we're trying to solve is people not living their lives on purpose. And that was a problem that we were both faced with. Like, oh, we're not doing what we want to do, or what we feel like we're supposed to be doing, like what we were put on this earth to do. And what we realize is that the more you are aligned to your purpose, the more good you create for yourself and others. So the problem we're trying to solve is helping people figure out, like, what's important to you, who are you, what do you really care about, and then how do you create more good for yourself and others. And it's like you since I feel like almost day one, you've been so clear that this is the kind of work that you want to do. There's this part of me that wants you to, like, stake a claim and change the name of your business to, like, what the problem that you're really in love with right now, but that's just my wanting.
Maybe we're always iterating and trying new things, and so who knows? Maybe a rebrand is in my future. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we cover all these questions. This one, I'm curious what you did whenever, looking back on your undergrad days. How did you gain experience? And did you know you wanted to go into IO psychology as an undergrad? How did you gain experience when you were an undergrad?
That's a funny story. So, short answer, no. I kind of stumbled into IO, like many IO folks. I think fewer today, because more people know about IO than when I started. But I I was looking for a way not to do clinical psychology, to just be quite honest. I was like, no, that's not it for me. I'm 23 years old. I don't want to be somebody's therapist. So I started searching for other options. And so I looked up social work, and I'm like, that's not it. And then my school had an intro to IO class. So in undergrad. So I took that and was like, oh, this is interesting. And so I talked to some of the IO folks about what they were doing. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of cool. And in undergrad, I had fallen in love with the process of learning. I took a learning class and was like, learning is it for me. And I found out that you can do learning and development, training and development as an IO. And I'm like, okay, got it. Like, stars are aligned. It's not clinical, it's not social work. I can work with people, I can work in organizations, and I can work around learning. That's it, and now I've just been on this journey of getting clear about how to help people learn. And what I've landed on is helping people learn more about themselves and pursuing what they want.
I love using that term journey. And I feel like, especially at undergrad, thinking I needed to have it all mapped out. I needed to have it all figured out. And it's like so much of this, I think it's as long as you're always moving in some direction and being open to knowing that direction might change. I think as long as, what's the term we use, navel staring? As long as you're not navel gazing. Navel gazing. As long as you're still, doing things that are exciting but being open-minded and open-eyed to, like, other opportunities that they come your way, and taking internships, making your own internship. I've made a number of my own internships. They just didn't exist, but I reached out and proposed what I wanted to do. Being okay to have the job on the side to pay the bills, to be able to volunteer. I volunteered in IO labs. Former internships, I was able to get them to re-up the internship that next year. But I can't undersell the power of just volunteering in labs.
Absolutely. I agree. I'd say, like, every opportunity I have had or got was because I was either doing work for free, essentially, or work that was I wasn't being paid extremely well. And that was because I wanted to create an opportunity for myself, right? It's because I wanted to get the experience. So yeah, sometimes you might have to do something that you don't get paid for, at least for a little bit. But if you really care about the experience, then, you know, it'll be worth it for you in the future. So in my master's program, I was one of the first people to get an internship. And I got an internship like way before they recommended it. So I was like, I just want to learn. Like I want to learn how to do the work. And then I continue to kind of assess, like, is this what I want to be doing? Is this really it for me? And so I would encourage folks to go try it and then reflect. Like, okay, what do I want? I think this is what I want. And then you go do it and you're like, this is it, or this isn't quite it. And then just rinse and repeat that process. And you'll find your way one day, sooner or later.
Yeah, I feel like learning what you don't like is almost more valuable than learning what you do.
Yeah.
And, you know, we don't live in our parents' generation or our parents' generation where we have one job for the rest of our lives and then that's it, right? Like we, you know, and some might find that, you know, anxiety provoking. I find that exciting because we can always reshape and reform where we're headed with our careers. And I feel like IO as a field in general, there's so many different avenues you can take. You can be an IO psychologist your whole career and do 20, 30 different jobs and roles and functions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I've said before, like I am a coach, but I very much see myself as an IO psychologist. And I think that makes me a better coach, much better. And it's like, you could imagine being a coach without having this background, trying to consult without having an IO background. It's going to look very different. So IO, I think I love it as a foundation for my career.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad we did this. I hope those on the call got value from it. I will be reposting it. So it'll be on my YouTube page. I'll share with you if you want to post it as well. Any final words of wisdom for those still on the call?
I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but I'd say if you're either curious about IO or you're in IO and you don't know where to go, I'd say just get started. And like we just talked about, you'll learn as you go, and that's okay. The thing I love about learning is that we always have more to do. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to like get it right or find the exact right path. I don't care where you're at in your life, you have a lot of time, you know, and just enjoy the process of learning. Obviously, I'm biased, but I find the process of learning to be quite enjoyable, and so do many people that I work with. So just enjoy the ride and make sure that you're doing work that, you know, you are interested in and you feel aligned to.
All of that, and connect. I can't, you know, you're on this call, so now you know at least 2 IO psychologist perspective, but there's a bunch more of us out there. So build your network, grow, especially locally. Society for IO Psychology has a bunch of resources as well. But, you know, just build up your network of IO psychologists. We all have different takes. You just heard from 2, but there's thousands more. So reach out and connect, and enjoy the journey, enjoy the process. That's all we got.
Yeah. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much for this.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and take care out there.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.